Hi, I'm Chris Sarandon, and welcome to Cooking by Heart, where we revisit the vivid memories of the food we grew up with.
I couldn't believe the tastes and the flavors.
Lydia Bastianich. Hi, Chris. Susan Sarandon.
And more importantly, the people and the stories attached to that time in our lives.
You know, I've been dying to chop this up with you for a while now.
Yeah.
And I would do Julia Child.
This is a lovely chocolate macadamia nut truffle that has dark chocolate. You can get it in milk chocolate too. I prefer the dark.
Ladies and gentlemen, Alice Waters.
I was the one sort of like mommy dearest.
He'd order one side of the menu and eat that. And then when he was finished eating that, he'd order the other side of the menu and eat all of that. Emptied the kitchen.
Food is the thing. Come on. We have that. Campaign.
My guest today is James Naughton. Naughton's first love is the theater, where he has won a Theater World Award for Long Day's Journey into Night and Broadway's Best Actor in a Musical Tony Award for City of Angels. And he also won a second Tony Award for his portrayal of Billy Flynn in the musical Chicago. He has also played leading roles on Broadway in I Love My Wife with my wife, Joanne Gleason, Whose Life Is It Anyway?, Democracy, among others. His films include The Paper Chase, The First Wives Club, The Devil Wears Prada, and Factory Girl Again, among others. On television, he starred in Faraday and Company, the television series of Planet of the Apes, as well as Making the Grade, Trauma Center, Brooklyn Bridge, Damages, and Cagney and Lacey. His voice can be heard promoting the products Cialis, Nexium, and Nasal Chrome, as well as being the official voice of Audi in the United States of America. He's a frequent narrator on television's Nature series, and Naughton has also directed several plays on Broadway, including the 2002 revival of Our Town, starring his friend Paul Newman, and I must say I am very impressed, and I welcome my friend Jimmy Naughton. Hi, James. How are you?
Hi, Chris. I'm fine, thank you.
You know, we usually start the show with Providence, and Providence for you is pretty much close to home. Connecticut, yes?
Yes.
Born where?
Born in Middletown, raised in West Hartford. We moved there when I was 3. My folks were both teachers in West Hartford, which is the reason we moved there.
Ah, were they teachers in Middletown?
My mother was during World War II. My dad was gone, and she was a teacher at Middletown High. And then she and my father both taught in the school system at Hall High School and Conard High School in West Hartford. And then my dad went into administration. I think probably to make a couple of more bucks, you know?
Right. So when you were growing up, they were both working during the day. Who was the cook?
Until she died, my grandmother,
Oh.
Rose McAloon Walsh,
Oh.
who had been widowed many years before, lived with us. And so I, being the eldest and first grandchild, had the benefit of having an adoring grandmother who lived with us.
Oh, how great.
It was.
What was her fare like?
It's hard for me to tell. I was a kid,
Right.
and we were all Irish.
Mm-hmm.
We're not known for a lot of great gustatory stuff.
Right.
I'm discovering that that's not actually true these days. But she was a terrific baker in addition to being a cook.
Mm-hmm.
So we had huge cakes and pies and all that sort of wonderful stuff. Yeah.
Do you have a recollection as you're growing older, that is from the time you were, say, that's when my memories begin, you know, when I'm like 5 or 6, 7, whatever, of what the kind of daily fare was like from your grandma?
Yeah, it was meat and potatoes pretty much.
Yeah.
Meat and potatoes and a vegetable.
Mm.
In the summertime, we had some fresh vegetables. A lot of times back in the 50s, you may remember this, we had a lot of canned vegetables.
Oh, boy. Yeah.
But the real story of my family and food centers around the fact that my father had a very, very sensitive digestive system.
Mm-hmm.
And there were lots of things he wouldn't eat or didn't like or couldn't eat. So I grew up with a very small little palate.
Mm-hmm.
tomatoes, for example. He couldn't eat tomatoes, and so we didn't have tomatoes. And so I didn't ever have a piece of pizza until I was, I think, a sophomore in college.
Yikes.
No pasta sauce. Imagine growing up as a kid without spaghetti sauce.
Mm-hmm.
So what did we eat? Well, we ate buttered noodles. How about that?
Mm.
Get much whiter and blander than
But not so terrible, actually.
Well, I loved it, actually.
Especially for a kid.
Yeah, for a kid. What do you
That's the go-to meal for a lot of my grandchildren.
Well, I was sort of a challenge if I went to somebody else's house, one of my friends' houses.
Yeah.
I was a challenge because I didn't eat this and I didn't eat that, and I didn't know any better. So,
Yeah.
You know, and my friends' mothers tried really hard to give me something
that you would eat,
that I wouldn't say no to. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I think, most kids grow up with particular aversions to things. I had a thing about celery when I was a kid. I had a thing about, various other things. I know my watching my grandkids and my kids, for instance, when they were growing up, same thing. So I don't think it's that unusual, but the fact that your diet was already narrow at home.
Yeah.
And then here you are visiting. Were the kids that you went to have dinner with, that is friends, was the food a little more exotic?
No.
Right. just more of it.
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
Not exotic, but, it wasn't as limited a bunch of choices as we had at my house.
Right. You have siblings, right?
A brother and a sister, younger, yeah.
Yeah. And what was the conversation like around the dinner table with two teachers for parents and siblings?
Oh, yeah. My father was a stickler for grammar and the usage of words. So that was a given.
Mm-hmm.
You said the conversation?
Yeah.
Well, I don't remember that it was politics, which is different from around our table now.
Was there conversation?
Yeah, there was. It was always, and it was spirited and it was competitive.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. And a lot of sports.
Mm.
We were playing all sorts of sports depending on the season, which is sort of a problem these days because they don't allow children to discover where their skills may lie. They make them choose at the age of 6 or 8 or something.
Yeah.
If they want to be on the traveling team, you have to play in the spring and the fall, and which I think is ridiculous. I have a very talented baseball player grandson now. He's 12 years old. My daughter Kira's son, Charlie.
Yep.
He's on a traveling team out of Brooklyn. So last year, for example, I wanted to see him play. So Sarah and I had the privilege of driving out to Patchogue, Long Island, so we could spend $400 one night at a Hilton Garden Inn out on the LIE, which doesn't make any sense.
No.
And then we went up to Newburgh to see him.
Jeez. That's a traveling team.
Yeah, and they play like 8 months a year or maybe more.
Yeah.
And it's every weekend, and they'll play 5 games in 2 days on Saturday and Sunday. Mm-hmm. If you win, you keep playing. So, it's Charlie loves it. To his great credit, my son-in-law, Ben, loves it too.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a pretty nice group of parents who go and support it and hang out together. So that's what it is.
Yeah. Now, it's interesting because when you're going back to your childhood, when I was growing up, we played everything.
Yeah.
Depending on the season.
Exactly.
And from what I understand, sports physiologists are much more prone to recommend that kind of regimen, even for kids who are really good at one sport.
Yeah.
Because it tends to exercise the entire body rather than one particular set of muscles.
Yeah.
And there have been a lot of injuries, particularly in baseball with kids who play all year round.
Yeah. When they're 8, 9, 10, 11 years old, they're probably not going to get badly hurt. But I'm watching these kids now who are 12, 13, 14. And I played all through school. In fact, I played through college.
Yeah.
Soccer and baseball. But I was stupid and, just did whatever it took, threw myself around. Now I'm discovering that all those injuries that I suffered in those years are coming back to haunt me at this age.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So the variety was constricted by the fact that your dad was he allergic?
I guess so.
Or did he have just gastrointestinal problems?
Yeah, I had gastrointestinal reactions to foods that were tough on him.
So they may have been allergies.
Well, they may have been, but
there was no way. Yeah.
It was the 1950s. There were no such things as allergies.
Yeah, exactly. And what about school food? Was your school food like pretty much everybody else's, terrible and bland?
Yeah, when I ate it there, and I remember my mother making lunches for me. And in high school, she would make a bag lunch for me, and it would have 3 sandwiches in it.
Jeez.
And I thought nothing of eating 3 sandwiches, and then I was hungry like 2 hours later.
Right. What were the sandwiches? You remember?
Basically ham and cheese or chicken or tuna fish.
Would she vary the 3, or were they all the same?
Well, that requires a memory that I don't think I have.
Right. What about when you came home from school?
Oh, yeah.
Because I know I was always hungry when I got home from school. What did you eat when you got home from school, other than the meal?
Cake, probably.
Oh, really?
Huge, big chocolate devil's food cakes that my grandma would make, Coconut cream pie.
Oh, I used to love it.
I still love that.
Yeah.
Or banana cream pie.
Mm-hmm.
Devil's food cake was the deal.
Oh, man.
The iced tea was terrific in a great, big, huge, terrific sweating silver
container tureen.
A lot of ice and a lot of lemon and a lot of fresh tea.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Rose McAloon Walsh was pretty good at that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And it was really good.
I'm fascinated by her middle name. Was that her maiden name?
Yeah.
McAloon. Yeah.
Sarah and I were over in Ireland last May, not for the first time, and found the baptismal certificate of my great-grandfather, 1850, and my great-great-grandfather, 1816.
Wow.
He was James Naughton, and my great-grandfather was Michael Naughton, in a little town called 6 Mile Bridge, so named because the bridge is 6 miles from the center of Limerick.
Ah.
That was a delight. We'd been there before, but I had the wrong dates, and so I couldn't find exactly who was when and where.
Do you recall on this trip, now we're in the sort of more recent past, what the food was like there?
We ate pretty well. We slept well. We drove a lot.
Yeah.
And driving in Ireland is really fun. You're on the wrong side of the car with a stick shift with your left hand on the wrong side of the road. It requires a lot of concentration, actually, so it can be kind of tiring.
I found it nerve-wracking.
Yeah, it can be that. You have to concentrate on what you're doing, or you're in trouble. And driving down the little lanes,
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of Guinness involved. So food probably wasn't number one at the time, but it was fun.
Mm-hmm.
It occurred to me just a little while ago that I actually took a knives course at Sur La Table in New York about maybe 10 or 12 years ago. And I had such a great time learning how to dice an onion properly, etc.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I went back the next day and took another course, and we made a whole meal. And I have had a little bit of experience when needed with cooking. When my kids, Greg and Kira, were maybe in middle school, elementary school, Pam went back to school and got a master's degree in social work. So I became Mr. Mom for quite a while. And that meant that somebody had to cook dinner for the kids.
Right.
And that was me. So not ever having done that before, I spent some time with recipes and making things that I'd work for several hours and make a pot roast that I thought was going to be really delicious with roasted potatoes and vegetables. And the kids decided they didn't like meat that year. I was never rewarded for my gustatory.
Right.
Attempts. Yeah.
Do you remember any of the other things you cooked for the kids?
Well, I know that one of the things that I liked was cooked carrots, with buttered carrots with maybe something on it.
Did you roast them or did you saute them or what? Do you remember?
Yeah, the first time I probably boiled them. In the in the tradition of the great Irish tradition.
Right.
But after that, I did do it. I roasted them and roasted potatoes with a little, I can't remember how I sweetened them. Was it brown sugar maybe or maple syrup?
Mm-hmm.
They were pretty good.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think the kids liked them, though.
Did you ever cook with your kids? With them, helping?
Yeah, and now with the grandchildren, too.
Ah.
Although I have to say, Pam, as you know, my late wife, passed away about 12 years ago.
Yeah.
And I got lucky again, and I got married to a wonderful woman named Sarah.
Yep.
Who is, it turns out, a terrific cook.
Oh.
And I'm not sure she ever thought of herself as being a terrific cook, but she gets in there every day and she goes after it. And it turns out she's a terrific cook.
Well, it sounds like she has something of a passion for it.
Yeah, she does things very well and quickly
Mm-hmm.
and easily. And I'm a pretty good dishwasher and pan scraper.
Yeah.
So I try to do what I can,
Scullery.
to help,
Yeah.
to say thank you.
Yeah.
You don't have to do that. I can do that.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Did you guys go out to eat at all?
We did, but not much. Living on teachers' salaries, I don't think you could take the family out to dinner easily.
Right.
Like that. I remember that my mom and dad both taught for a time, and then my mother stopped because she was busy with us. There were periods there where one of them would teach night school.
Oh.
Just, for Christmas money.
Right.
One of them would teach in the first semester, and so the other one would stay home. And then in the second semester, the other parent would teach, and that parent would stay home at night.
Mm-hmm.
In addition to working all day.
Right. If mom, who was the primary cook, was working, did she pre-prepare a meal before she went to work if she worked at night?
Well, I mentioned my grandmother.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
She died when I was 9, I think, or 10. And my mother really hadn't ever really cooked before that.
Mm-hmm.
So in addition to having to deal with the fact that she'd lost her mother, and they had been like that their whole lives.
Right.
She also had to discover that she had to put dinner on the table at night.
Yeah.
That was a real challenge, in addition to working and coping with having lost, a beloved parent.
Yeah.
She did a pretty heroic job of it. And I don't think I was aware at that time how difficult that was for her.
Yeah. I mean, looking back, it's easier to see now.
Yeah. And we talked about it later on. Years later.
Yeah?
Yeah. My mother's father died of a burst appendix.
Whoa.
When she was 8 years old in 1955, before they had penicillin.
This was something that was very common for that time. I know my father lost a brother.
Yeah.
Almost exactly around the same time.
Yeah.
From peritonitis, from an affected appendix.
Yeah. And it was just really a year or two or before penicillin became available. So
Right.
That's what caused it. And so losing her dad when she was 8, her mother and she basically, were tied at the hip until we lost my grandmother. And that affected the way food and things like that were done at our house. Yeah.
Let's move forward. So did you go to school near home or did you go away? College?
We lived in West Hartford, and I went to Brown, which was in Providence, Rhode Island, which was a couple hours away.
Any big discoveries once you went away?
Well, I remember when we went there, maybe our first meal at the refectory at Brown was lobster Newburg.
Gee.
And they put on a really nice meal for us, and I didn't like it. It was too exotic for me at the time.
Yeah. I mean, your palate was trained in a very sort of narrow spectrum. Yep.
It was like that. Can you see that?
Yeah.
But it's been wonderful to discover that now there's nothing that I don't like or won't eat, maybe except liver. I'm not crazy about that.
Yeah.
In college, of course, I began, branch out on my own, and I discovered food, and that was delightful. I remember going to a Chinese restaurant for the first time. And then Indian food. And of course, I'd still do anything for Italian food.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
really good Italian food.
Yeah.
In a way, what happened was, despite the fact that you had all this sort of, all these restrictions in terms of what you could eat when you were growing up,
Hmm.
it didn't narrow your palate as you got older. You were willing to, aside from the lobster, you were willing to give things a try.
Yes, very much so. But that was just beginning when I turned up my nose at the lobster.
Mm-hmm.
We have a house in Maine, and we go there every summer. And yeah, lobster is my life.
Ah,
The house is on the water, down on the rocks. We make a fireplace down there out of rocks and firewood and big, huge cauldrons of boiling water and lobsters
oh,
and steamers,
mm-hmm.
clams. And then after all that comes out of the pot, you've got this huge pot of soaking broth that's spectacular.
Oh, yeah.
So we toss the corn in there. And you don't need butter on corn after it's been cooked in that
Right,
stuff.
especially fresh corn. Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite wonderful.
Yeah. Oh, sounds great.
Yeah, it does. And I've got some wonderful pictures over the years of me. You'd be so proud of me manning, the tools.
Mm-hmm.
I'm always there making a tool, a couple of tools to lift the lid off the lobster pot.
Mm-hmm.
With little, get them up and take it down.
Yep.
Otherwise, you're in trouble.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah, potholders don't help.
No.
Not with something that big.
No.
So you start discovering food when you go to college.
Yes.
Okay. And then after college, did you go on to grad school?
Yeah, Yale Drama School.
Right.
I think that's where I finally kind of really started to go to Chinese restaurants because they were right down the street. They were ubiquitous.
Right.
And they were relatively inexpensive.
And for a college student, yeah, that's where you go. Yeah.
And I was a young father in graduate school.
Oh.
Greg was born after my first year there. Pam and I got married. Greg was born. I was living in an apartment 2 blocks from the drama school, that second floor of a house, for $90 a month, a 2-bedroom apartment. Those days are gone.
Those were the days, my friend. I mean, my first apartment in New York was a $250 a month apartment. So
that's a lot of money compared to what I was spending.
Oh, yeah.
Incensed when our landlord raised my rent from 90 to 110. I was like, where am I going to get that?
Yeah. Were you working?
Yeah, I worked basically. If I wasn't in school, I was working. I worked for Allied Van Lines in the summers as a Teamster. In fact, I just found my green Teamster shirt that says Allied 1 Jimmy on it.
Oh, how cool.
Yeah, it was. So I did that in the summer times because being paid as a Teamster was like the most money I could really make.
Right.
For that kind of a job. I delivered mail. I sorted mail in the Hartford post office on vacations, over Christmas vacation.
Mm-hmm.
I was a working man. If I had 15 minutes off, I was trying to figure out how to make some money at it.
Right. This is instructive, I think, for a lot of my listeners and my viewers who perhaps might have a romantic idea of what it's like becoming an actor over time and how you have to produce a real life in order to survive when you're not working. And at this point, you're in school. But what happened once you finished Yale Drama School?
2 of us from my class were hired into the Yale Repertory Theater.
Ah.
The other guy was Henry Winkler.
Ah.
I worked in the company from 2 weeks, actually, from 2 weeks after we graduated. Say we graduated the end of May. And 2 weeks later, Yale Rep went to East Hampton, Long Island, and we did the summer season at Guildhall out there. Alvin Epstein was in that company, Carmen de Lavalade. It was pretty wonderful. We did a whole season of story theater. Remember that?
Oh, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, at one point I worked with an acolyte of Paul Sills.
Yes, who was
and
that?
Viola Spolin.
Yes.
who wrote the original book.
Right.
And the technique, created the technique that Paul Sills kind of carried forward.
Who was it you worked with?
A guy by the name of Jerry Slavitt, who had worked with Viola somewhere, I don't know exactly where, and he created a theater company in Georgetown, because I was in graduate school there.
Yeah.
We did improv exercises during the day, and then we went into schools and did one-act plays and then did improv with the kids, all based on these theater games.
Right.
That Viola Spolin and Paul Sills, perfected and carried forward.
Arvin Brown, who was the Long Wharf Theater artistic director for 30 years,
Yep.
directed Robert Ryan, Geraldine Fitzgerald, and Stacy Keach, and a wonderful Irish actress named Patty Croft. And he was looking for someone to play Edmund.
Mm-hmm. The younger son.
And he'd seen me at the Rep.
Mm-hmm.
We closed on Saturday night, and I went to work in New York on Monday morning in rehearsal for Long Day's Journey.
Wow.
And that was the most wonderful place to work. And those folks were all just, Stacy had actually been at Yale before that, so I knew him slightly. And Geraldine and Bob Ryan were just total delights.
Yeah. Real old theater pros who actually made their bones as well in lots of movies in the 40s and 50s and into the 60s.
Yes, and you talk about how difficult for young actors it is. Robert Ryan, who was a movie star, told me that he had been a sandhog.
Why?
That he had built either the Lincoln or the Holland tunnels. I don't know which one. But as a young man in his early 20s, he was working as a sandhog digging one of those two tunnels.
Wow.
That's hard work.
Yeah. Well, and hard and dangerous.
Yeah. And Geraldine came over in 1938 or 9 with the Mercury Theater, Orson Welles. And she wound up on the cover of Life magazine as a beautiful Irish lass in 1950.
Oh, yeah. She was breathtakingly beautiful.
Yeah, she was.
And wonderful actress as well.
And just a great person to be around with. She used to come into my dressing room every single night because she knew that sometimes I'd do things a little bit differently. We all knew where the guideposts were along the way, emotionally where you had to get to. But if I did something a little differently, like if I picked up the pitcher usually on such and such a line, well, if she saw me pick it up like 3 or 4 or 5 lines earlier, I could see her eyes. She'd go, "Oh, we're off," So she would.
So she liked it. She liked
it.
It. Oh, great.
She'd come into my dressing room every night and she'd say, "Well, Ducks, what do you want to do different tonight?"
which is sort of antithetical to the whole idea of it's being spontaneous, which is let's plan ahead of time of what you're going to do.
She was just encouraging me.
I know, but I'm just saying this is sort of ironic that she would ask that. Was this off Broadway?
The old Promenade Theater, remember that on 76th Street?
Yeah, sure. 76 in Broadway.
It was the most beautiful off-Broadway house that there was.
Yeah.
And it's been closed down now, which is too bad.
I know. So now, when now you're in New York, you're with a family. You now have a family. You have a child.
Mm-hmm.
Was Pam working, or was Pam?
Actually, Pam was producing another child. We had Kira while I was doing Long Day's Journey into Night.
Oh, wow.
That was possibly the longest day of my life.
I'll bet.
We were living in New Haven still, commuting to New York. I said to Pam, this is really smart, right? I said to Pam, well, Kira was late, and we were waiting for her to come so that we could move closer to the city. I found an apartment in a house in Stamford, which is half the distance.
Yeah.
And we're hanging around waiting for the baby to be born at Yale, New Haven. So I said to Pam, why don't I move all this stuff now down to Stamford so that when you go into the hospital to have the baby, when you come out, we can go right home.
Go. Yeah.
She said, that's a good idea. I said, I'll leave our bed here in New Haven and Greg's bed here and the coffee pot and a couple of pots and pans, and I'll start doing. So I went out one morning after getting home late at night from Long Day's Journey. I rented a truck. I moved all the stuff because I'm a moving man. I moved all the stuff
You're a teamster. Yeah.
to Stamford. I unloaded everything in Stamford. I drove the truck back to New Haven. I got the car. I drove to New York to do long day's journey into night. I drove all the way back to New Haven. I got home about midnight, 12:30, and Pam looked at me and she said, "You better get some sleep, honey. We're going to the hospital tonight."
Oh.
I went, "Oh my God, really?" She said, "Yeah." I said, "Okay, wake me up in time to take a shower." And I went to sleep. She woke me up at 4 or 4:30. I took a shower. We dropped Greg off at 5 o'clock. I took her to the hospital, and Kira was born at 6 a.m.
Gee, perfect timing.
She waited till the last minute.
Yeah. Talk about a long day's journey into night.
That was the longest.
And into the morning. Yes,
Yeah.
right.
It's a good day, too.
Yeah. As your career is evolving, which is essentially now a theater career,
Yeah.
was there anything that was evolving culinarily? Were you guys cooking at home? Was Pam cooking? Now you have 2 small children.
Yeah.
So things are much more complicated.
Much more complicated. Yes, Pam cooked. She was studying writing at Middlebury College. And so she was really, her head was always in a book. I remember her standing at the stove, cooking something on the stove for us to eat.
Yep.
While reading a book and reaching up over her head to the cabinet and pulling out, I think it was cheese doodles. So,
keeping her energy going as she had these multiple activities going on, right? Multitasking.
Yeah. We weren't doing much in the culinary department except trying to get along,
Yeah.
But, I became a griller. And I have to say, I heard my son Greg say this past couple of months ago, he was trying to figure something out on the grill. And he said to, I think, his sister, he said, "Yeah, well, Dad's got some kind of crazy thing he does with the grill. He's got some understanding of this that I don't have." I thought, wow, that's pretty good. I've achieved something.
Yeah. To hear it from your son.
Yeah. My son-in-law, Ben, he's got a thing with his finger. He has a really smart, educated finger. He can count on whatever the thing is that's on the grill and tell you whether it's done or not.
My son does that as well. Yeah.
Yeah. I do it and I get my finger burned. But it doesn't tell me anything else.
Right.
Really good at it.
Yeah.
I may say, if he's here, as he was over Thanksgiving, I may say, "Hey, Ben, get your finger over here, will you? I need you."
Right. The turkey. And tell me if it's ready.
Yeah.
Was there a time when you guys ever moved to New York City, or did you remain in Connecticut?
We've never lived in New York City.
Really?
No. We were living in Stamford, and I was working mostly off Broadway. There were a couple of things along the way that came along. The Paper Chase, the movie, was shot in Toronto, and I was in that. Mm-hmm. A TV version of Look Homeward Angel with Geraldine Page that was pretty nice.
Oh, wow.
E.G. Marshall and Barney Hughes and Barbara Colby and Ronnie Cox and Timothy Bottoms. Also, he was in that as well as and Pamela Peyton Wright.
I remember the movie. Yeah,
that was wonderful experience. But I was living in Stamford, and my friend David Aykroyd. Do you know David?
I know who he is. I don't know David. No.
Well, he was a couple of years ahead of me at Yale, but we bonded when I joined the company. He was already in there.
Yeah,
and he had 2 daughters who were about the same age as Greg and Kira. So we all got to be very close, and we looked at each other and said, "We're both working off Broadway, and neither of us can make enough money to really live very well.
Exactly.
Why don't we rent a big house together with a nice yard and a playground for the kid, place."
Yeah.
So we did, and we lived together for a year and a half. And then I went to L.A. and did television for a while.
This was when you started doing series?
Yeah. I got hired to play Dan Daly's son in a not very good made-for-television. Do you remember the Snoop sisters and McLeod? And
yeah, sure.
They were hour-and-a-half NBC movies of the week. Well, we were called Faraday and Company. And it was Dan Daly and I playing father and son detectives.
Mm.
We lasted about a season. And then I was out in LA with my family, and there we were. And it was like, oh, now what am I going to do? So then I was auditioning for television shows. That's not really what I wanted to do. And Planet of the Apes came along. I had a $400 rent payment that was 2 weeks overdue.
Ooh.
So I said, well, I don't really want to, and I turned it down. And then I looked at my bank account again and I said, yeah, I better say yes to this.
That's right. This looks a little better today.
So I did.
Yep.
The great thing that came out of that was a friendship with Roddy McDowell.
Yeah. My friend Roddy as well. Yeah.
Roddy kept every friend that he ever made going back to childhood. And
how extraordinary it was that you'd get a birthday postcard from Roddy.
Yeah.
Wherever he was in the world, literally. Yeah. I got a postcard from him on a birthday from Prague.
Yeah.
Come on.
He would invite us to dinner. So we'd go to his house. And the first night we went, it was Vincent Price and his wife, Coral Brown, and Geneviève Bujold, with whom I had worked in a PBS production of Antigone in New York before we moved out there. Another night we went to dinner, and it was Joan Rivers, Jessica Tandy, Tandy Cronin, her daughter, George Axelrod, the writer of The Manchurian Candidate and a bunch of other things, and Pam and Kira and me. And he was just...
It was extraordinary. You know, I mean, that he had a bathroom. You remember the bathroom in his house with all the photos in it of the luminaries that he had worked with along the way?
Yeah.
But Roddy was not starstruck. He was friend-struck.
He just kept every friend.
Yeah.
And he kept them close, and he knew how to be a great friend.
Oh, he was a great friend.
One weekend, he invited us to go to dinner, and we'd just been there the weekend before. He promised the children that I would do something with them. And I said to him, we were still shooting at the time, and I said, well, we were just at dinner last Friday night. Why do you want us to come again this Friday night? And he just smiled. And I went, oh, she's going to be there, huh? And he said, yeah. Elizabeth Taylor was coming to dinner.
Yes, right.
So I said, I can't come. I promised the kids I would do something. So I never got to meet Elizabeth Taylor.
Yeah. We had a couple of near misses as well. Joanna did a tour with Roddy and Vincent Price and Coral.
Of what?
Charlie's Aunt.
Charlie's Aunt, yes.
Yeah.
I knew about that. He talked to me about being in it, and I couldn't do it.
Yeah. And Joanna said it was a crazy, wild, wonderful tour that they had. And then I did a movie with Roddy called Fright Night.
Oh.
And Roddy and I became close friends as well. And so we were on the list. We would go to dinner at Roddy's house, and he would have these, Stephanie Powers, great screenwriters. He would mix people.
Yeah.
In brilliant ways.
Yes, indeed.
He'd have a screenwriter, a director, a couple of actors, mostly movie-oriented, but still extraordinary.
Yeah. Yeah, he was something, and we all lost him much too soon.
Remind me the next time you come to dinner at our house, I'll show you a pew bench that Roddy gave us just before he passed away. He was divesting himself of a lot of stuff, and he was giving stuff to friends. And we just happened to be, we went to see him because we were living in LA at the time. And he told the story behind the acquisition of it, that he had to fight Ethel Merman on 8th Avenue at an antique shop. And he got the winning, whatever it was, he paid the most money for it. I don't remember exactly what it was, but Roddy always had great stories.
Yes, he did. He's missed.
Yes, very much so. So you moved to LA.
Yeah.
Were there any big changes there in terms of what you guys were experiencing food-wise? Because LA is very different from New York, and the ability to get very fresh food.
Yeah.
It was the sort of font of organic food at the time when we were there.
It did rub off on us in a very good way. Certainly fresh food and vegetables and fruits became, are really the staple.
Yeah.
Pam used to make some really wonderful stuff that we would have around. pasta salads with all kinds of fresh vegetables and things in it. And they were terrific for an actor who needed to eat something quickly, but not too much. And, it was always there. And that carried over. So when I wound up in Williamstown in the summer times, it was very beneficial that we had spent time in LA.
Yeah.
Those 3 years that we were there.
During your lifetime, either from your childhood or all the way through your adulthood, did you guys ever have any gardens? Vegetable gardens?
Yes. I have a wonderful photograph of a friend of mine who lives here in town in Weston, a neighbor, who met me the day that we moved into our house here in 1977. Mm-hmm. We went out and got a rototiller, and it was out here in the rocky backyard.
Yep.
And we had a huge garden. I've seen your garden. I mean, your garden is huge, but we had a very, very large garden, and the ground was so rough and so rocky that the two of us were actually trying to man this rototiller. Mm-hmm. He on one handle and I on the other. And we went over to his house and did the same thing over there.
Right.
But we had this huge garden, and we put everything into it. And then we'd go to Williamstown for the summer and come back, and there'd be like 3 tomatoes, So I was spending hundreds and hundreds of dollars,
right,
and a lot of work and a lot of hours, and the rabbits had a wonderful time.
Uh-huh.
We did that for a bunch of years until finally I said, I think maybe this is we're pushing a big rock up a hill here. We should stop doing
both
this.
Literally and figuratively.
Yeah.
This garden of mine that you've seen, one of my daughters, she started that 12 years ago. And she was the one with a friend of hers, because they were going to raise organic produce and sell it. They were the ones who cleared the rocks out of the land, right?
Wow.
It took them 2 months.
Yeah.
And they literally built another stone wall with it. I mean, it was crazy.
I don't have a daughter like that. That's pretty good.
Yeah, it was great. It's evolved since then. But at any rate, something I do want to get into before we conclude, because it's something that I know that's very dear to you, and something also that I think I'd like to pass on to my listeners and my viewers. And that is that I know that your late wife, Pam, passed away a number of years ago, and that there was an issue about end of life and what was going to transpire at the time. And I know you've become very involved in compassion and choices.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think it would be worthwhile for folks to hear.
Sure. Thanks for the invitation to do so. I'm very committed to this, to trying to get Connecticut to pass this law called Medical Aid in Dying, MAID. The first time it was introduced to the state legislature in Connecticut was 1994.
Jeez.
Believe that. It was finally passed in Oregon for the first time in 97. Since then, there are 10 states and the District of Columbia that have passed the law. It allows a person at the end of life, if that person is suffering and just can't do it anymore, to end the suffering.
Yeah.
That's the whole point. It's not for everybody. It's not necessary for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
We all think that we're going to, pass from this good life gently, surrounded by our families in our bedrooms.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't go that way for some people.
Yes.
People say, well, what about hospice? And I say, well, hospice is wonderful. Both of my parents, benefited from hospice when it was their turn to go. But for some folks, it's not easy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so committed to it. Is one day after my wife fought pancreatic cancer for 4 years, which is a very long time.
It's a long time.
And she was heroic. You wouldn't have known for the first 3 years that she was even ill. But when it finally came in to get her toward the end, one morning she said to me, and it surprised me. She said, Jimmy, I don't want to wake up anymore. And when she saw the look on my face, she said, well, we've always known that this was a fatal disease.
Yeah.
And that night when I crawled into bed with her at about 11 o'clock, she woke up and she peered at me and she said, oh, I thought I wasn't going to have to wake up anymore. And Chris, I tell you, when your loved one says something like that to you,
yeah,
there was nothing that I wouldn't have given her. And so after she did pass, I took up this cause because I knew firsthand what it was like for someone at the end to be asking to please help them let go.
Right. Not only for the person who's suffering, but also for the family member, the caretaker.
It's very tough to watch your loved one in that situation.
Yeah.
And so I've been going up every year now for 6 or 7 years, 6 years, I think, where I've testified before the Public Health Committee at their public hearings and telling my story and telling Pam's story and saying, we need to pass this legislation. 75% of Connecticut residents want it. That's the latest Gallup poll a couple of years ago.
And I'm sure that's pretty common across the country.
Yeah, I think it is. There are two obstacles. One is the Catholic Church. They've spent a lot of money to try to defeat this legislation.
Mm-hmm.
And the other one is people with disabilities. They are promoting a story, a fiction, that they could possibly be, that people with disabilities could be pushed into taking their lives prematurely by people who, I guess, want to profit from that.
Mm-hmm.
The heirs.
Yeah.
Which would, by the way, be a felony.
Yeah.
Since 1997, all these states that have passed it, and in our neighborhood, Maine, Vermont, and New Jersey have passed it. But there just isn't any evidence that that has happened in any of the states where this has been legal.
Right. And also, aren't there a large number of very specific criteria that have to be fulfilled in order for this to occur? Yes.
Briefly, you have to be, by 2 doctors, have to say that you have 6 months or less to live. You have to be able to self-ingest the medication, the cocktail, so that someone else can't do it to you.
Yep.
You have to be a resident of the state. Now, there's a woman whom I knew named Linda Shannon Bluestein, who lived over in Fairfield. She was trying to get Connecticut to allow this to happen, and it didn't happen. So she sued the state of Vermont. She sued the governor of Vermont over the residency requirement, and she won. So Vermont rescinded the residency requirement. She was allowed to go up to Brattleboro to find a house, an Airbnb, to find 2 doctors who would examine her and say, yes, you have less. And she took advantage of that, and she went there last January 3rd or 2nd, and the next day she took the medication. She ended her suffering. She had stage 4 fallopian tube cancer, and she had been suffering for a long time. The problem is, every year I go up there and I testify along with other people. Some of the people that are testifying are people who are sick, and they're saying, please, I know what's coming. I'm going to need this. And so I see these people, and then the next year, maybe they're still there or they're not.
They're not.
And I say to their families, how is it going? How did it go down for Sharon? It happened to Emily. And I hear these terrible stories about, the last 3 weeks of her life were everything that she didn't want them to be.
Yeah.
I'm still trying. I'm really involved. If people who are listening, and this is going on in lots of states. New York has a Compassion and Choices advocate there. You can go to Compassion and Choices to the website. You can give money. You can volunteer. There are lots of things you can do. You can write to your representative or your state senator, your state rep or your state senator in any of these states and say, we want this. And eventually it'll come. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you, Jimmy. Thank you. I know it's difficult in some ways to talk about, but at the same time, it's something that's been important in your life. It was obviously important for Pam. Sadly, it didn't end the way you hoped, but at any rate, I appreciate your talking about it. And
I just noticed that I'm wearing my Hole in the Wall Gang Camp sweatshirt.
Yeah.
Hole in the Wall Camp has been around for 36 years. Paul Newman founded it. It was his idea. He took me up there in 1988 while it was being built, and I've been involved ever since. I got a letter yesterday from the CEO sharing an article that was in the New York Times over the weekend. I think it was November 25th. A family had lost a child after a long, long years of fighting cancer. They were really having a difficult time dealing with the fact that they'd lost a child. And they found, and the word that they used was, we found sanctuary in the bereavement group that the Hole in the Wall Gang camp offered. And I thought,
yeah,
boy, talk about doing good work,
And I'm sure that example is multiplied exponentially for the number of people that the Hole in the Wall has helped.
Hole in the Wall has been known for giving children who are ill an experience in the summertime, that giving them a camp experience that I've had children say to me, I can't wait till next summer. I'm going to try to live all through the winter so that I can get back to camp next summer. That's how important it is to the children.
Yep.
And we recognize that we've lost a bunch of children, and that's very hard for the families to deal with. So we created this bereavement
group,
and it's paying off. It's doing what it was intended to do, which is to give people who've had that terrible experience a place to go to get sanctuary. That was the word that the mother used.
Wow.
How wonderful is that, huh?
Yeah. Well, if any of you out there are predisposed to find these two, both Compassionate Choices and Hole in the Wall Gang, of interest in terms of support, all you have to do is go online and just Google both organizations, and you can help, I'm sure, in some way.
The Hole in the Wall Gang camp.org or compassionandchoices.org. Yeah.
With those final observations, I'd like to thank James Naughton for joining me on Cooking by Heart. Jimmy, it's been a real pleasure, always.
It's been a delight to be with you. I never thought I would ever be on a podcast where the food that one ate as a child would be of interest.
I know. When I approached you about this, you said this to me many times. No, we can't talk about the food of my childhood. Well, here you go.
Thanks for asking and insisting.
Oh, absolutely. My pleasure. James Naughton, thank you so much for joining us on Cooking by Heart.
Thanks, Chris.